Yo, what is up, guys? I'm bringing you a brand new video, and today we're talking about the best in slot lightstone combinations and crystal combinations for both PvP and for PvE, and we're going to get to a pretty granular level in this video, talking about every single grind spot in the game and things to think about, as well as capped and uncapped and tanky versus full blast AP whenever you're trying to build for PvP. So we're going to start off with the PvE portion here, and let's go on and talk about the Lightstone combinations first. But before we can talk about Lightstones, we really need to talk about just the AP caps of certain spots and how to know what they are and how to know what species mobs are and things like that, because that's very important consideration these days when deciding what Lightstone combinations to use. Because it's really not that easy to just say, I have one size fits all Lightstone combo and this is what I use for everything. I will talk about that if you really want to be super like non-min-maxy about it. But we are going to talk about the min-max section first, and then we'll go to maybe a one-size-fits-all. That'll never be the best, but pretty effective. So in order to determine the particular lightstones you want to use, we first need to get some knowledge of the grind spot that we're at. So if we're at Olin's Valley, for example, so if you're at the main map here and you click on a grind spot and you go to Dekia's version, if you click this button right here, it'll have a little 1000 restricted thing, and it's going to teach you about the AP caps of certain spots. So Olin's has 1000, this has 1000, this has 950, and it's also going to teach you about the AP in excess of that number and how effective that AP is in excess of 950. So at Trolls, you only get 30% AP effectiveness past 950, and at Olin's, past 1000, you get 70% effectiveness. So it's a little bit less harsh. But what that 70% is representing is, let's say you have 1100 AP. That means that you have effectively 1070 effective AP, because that 100 additional is only being applied at a 70% rate. How do you calculate this 1000 number? How do you get to that number? You just go into the My Stats page and you add your numbers together. So 678 plus 239, that is somewhere around 900 effective AP. By the time you buff up, when you put on a simple cron meal, now you get an additional 30. Let's say that you put on a Giants draft, now you get an additional bit of AP. You basically want to build that number up to as close to that effective number that is the cap of the grind spot that you're at. And that is how you're going to know at that point what artifact combinations you should be using, because species type damage is effective at an 85% rate past that of the 1000 AP. So if we're going to use Olin's as our example, if we have 1000 AP and we have 100 species damage, we effectively have 1085 AP. But if we were to have 1100 AP between our monster damage and our AP, then we're effectively only getting 1070 AP. So species damage can be really, really useful in particular grind spots where, especially in Turos, for example, where you only have a 30% effective rate past that 950, you get an 85% effectiveness when you run additional Kama Sylvian damage against Turos, because they are Kama Sylvian mobs. So it's way better to build Kama damage versus them past that 950 than it is to be building additional AP past that. And the way that you can tell what type of species a mob is you just walk up to it and you hit it. And so you can kind of logically determine what certain things are. Like, obviously, Kama Sylvian mobs and Odraxia mobs, they're all Kama Sylvian. And orcs are, you know, they're demi-humans because they're not humans and they're kind of human looking, so they're demi-human. So you just hit the mob and you can tell that this particular mob is a demi-human based on this icon. Kama Sylvian mobs, they are going to look exactly like the comma symbol. It looks just like this, and this is actually what they look like, all four of them. So human damage looks like a hood, demi-human's a little baby, and then animal, this means that there is no species type. This is effectively a monster that does not have additional species type you can build, and then comma Sylvian looks exactly like this. So once you know the species type of your mob, and you know that the AP cap of a particular spot is whatever you've learned, so in Orc's case, it's 856, you can now start deciding, all right, I am going to be grinding at Orcs. I have 856 AP. What Lightstone combination do I want to run? Well, because they're demi-human, a really, really good Lightstone combination is the wild insert whatever you're fighting here. So the wild Kama Sylvian, the wild demi-human, the wild human. Those are Lightstone combinations that I use all the time. So for example, the demi-human one here is going to give me an additional a bunch of demi-human damage. And so when I put it on, it's going to give me 15 additional demi-human damage. Plus, it also gives me +5 demi-human per crystal. So that's 30 demi-human damage that I now effectively gain. So if you go to my stats page, you can see that instead of 28, we're now at 58. That additional 30 is effective at a 85% rate past the cap. And as we know at Orcs, because of what I just taught you, Orcs has a 5% excess restriction, which means that instead of gaining 30 additional AP and only getting maybe 4 of it, I'm now gaining 85% effectiveness of that species damage because I am in excess of the cap. So in the case of orcs, it would be better to be running species type damage of demi-human because of such an aggressive restriction on additional AP. And this can be mostly true at every single grind spot you can think of. If you can reach the AP limit anywhere that has a species type, it's pretty much always best to be running the wild, whatever species it is. And when I'm saying the wild, what I'm essentially referring to, something that you could look up, I'm going to link Garmoth in the description of this video, but the wild demi-human. This will tell you the name of it, and it'll give you the explanation of what it gives. If you search for the wild, you can see all the different ones. We got the wild human, demi-human, and Kama Sylvian. These are very, very effective whenever you are fighting those specific species types of mobs. And these are ones that I use all the time. Now, if you are not at the AP cap of the grind spot that you're at, even despite the fact that it has a species type, it's actually better to start looking at some different combinations. So if we were to look at the this set right here. So this particular Lightstone set is 2 Rage and 2 Strikes. And what this gives you is it gives you an additional 24 AP as well as 5% critical hit damage. So even though it's less species type damage, the 24 AP is going to get you effectively quite further, as well as giving you the additional critical hit damage. This is always going to be the best in slot whenever you're not reaching the AP cap of whatever grind spot you're at. So this is the closest to a jack of all trades Lightstone combination that you can get. It's pretty much effective almost everywhere. It's only bad to run and not min-maxy at all at Elvia spots that like Serendia and Kelphia and Elvia. Everywhere else, you can almost run this pretty much anywhere and you'll be fine or close enough to fine. Another particular set that you could run if you only have 1 strike and you're looking for sort of a jack of all trades Lightstone combination would be 2 predations, a shadow, and a strike. What this effectively gives you is it gives you, what is that? 6 plus 7 is 13 additional AP against monsters. It's going to give you 6% back attack damage and 3% critical hit damage. This is another really, really good jack of all trades. Like, you could run it pretty much anywhere and do very well with it. But it's never going to be 100% fully effective anywhere for the most part. And then if you want to go even cheaper than that, and you want to get something you can just buy right off the market, then Watch Your Back is another really good one. It requires 2 Rage and 2 Shadows, and this is going to give you 24 AP, just like All Out Attack, but instead of the 5% crit damage, it gives you 5% back attack damage, which the reason it's not quite as good is because you're not always back attacking monsters all the time. If you are always back attacking monsters, this is pretty good. But if you are ever fighting in spots where the packs are not quite that clean, typically the monsters that are not getting back attacked are the ones that take the longest to kill, and those are the ones that are preventing you from moving to the next pack sooner. So it doesn't really help doing additional back attack damage unless you're exclusively back attacking whatever it is that you're fighting, like an Olin, for example. So that is why Watch Your Back is second to that of All Out Attack. But those are the general Lightstone combinations that you should consider for PvE. General rule of thumb, of course, is if it has a species type and you're reaching the cap, then you use the wild. If it does not have a species type, then you use All Out Attack. If you're not reaching the cap of that particular spot, then you probably want to be using all out attack or any of the other three that I just talked about in order to boost up your AP. And that's the considerations that you want to keep in mind whenever you are building Lightstone combinations for PvE. Now, the crystals that you're going to be wanting to run, these considerations are rather similar, but there's a few things that you should think about. So this right here is my standard, just full damage PvE setup whenever I'm just trying to raise my particular AP as much as physically possible, and I'm fighting a spot that has back attacks. If I'm fighting in a spot that does not have a lot of back attacks, like trolls, for example, you're exclusively back attacking, then you substitute these darkness crystals for corrupteds. But this is like the standard baseline crystals that you should be running if you just want maximum AP. Now, once we're at this point, most grind spots require a little bit of sacrifice. So, for example, let's say that you're fighting at Olin's. Olin's has a lot of CC, which means that you're probably going to take out these powers and put in something like an adamantine and a giant in order to gain additional resistances. And because you're fighting Olin's, the back attacks are important, so you're going to put in the darknesses. So these 4 crystals right here are pretty much the only ones that you're ever going to change. Additionally, another thing to consider is that if you don't want to run the ultimate Macalods, there's really not a big deal in just running more powers. These ancient flame powers are barely worse than Macalods, and so if you're worried about dying and losing them, you could just be running those, and it's going to be virtually as effective. And that is pretty much it when it comes to crystal considerations. If you need resistances, then you run them in lieu of the powers. If you need to get more back attack damage, you run them instead of corrupteds. And if you don't need any sort of resistance or any sort of back attack, then you're just running the standard build right here. And you're just fine. Now, something else to consider, and this is like really, really min-maxy and something that I only do just because I'm kind of cheap. This is a crystal setup that I like to run for, say, Crypt of Resting Thoughts, or say if you're going to go to Ash Forest. Because Ash Forest and a lot of spots are Kama Sylvian, instead of running Rebelliouses, which has 5 AP and 5 additional monster damage, I like to run Voltaras because it has 5 AP and 3 extra damage to Kama Sylvians. And because I'm always going to be at that 1,000 plus AP where I'm already at the spot, at the AP cap of the spot, these are basically just as effective as Rebelliouses, but if I happen to die for some reason, I could potentially lose like a 1.3 bill less expense. So that's something you could do for Voltaras. And additionally, this gets more effective at places like Turos, for example, that has a 30% cap on additional AP. These actually end up being better in most cases, in actually all cases, over that of Rebelliouses because of that additional Kama Sylvian damage. But that's basically it. If you don't have a Girins tier, because they are kind of expensive, then just run a Bongzwang tier. But that is it when it comes to crystals, and that is it when it comes to artifacts. Now, we are going to just quickly highlight over what these crystals are, just in case you don't know what they are. But these are just brutal decimations. And then we've got AP, Corrupteds, Macalods, Rebelliouses, Glorious Akarods. These are like non-negotiables. You always want to have these. And then, of course, the Girins tier. And then a Dark Red Fang Valor gives 5 AP and then 2 critical hit additional. So those are all the crystals. And hopefully that's going to give you a lot of good information on what you need for PV. So for the PvP side of things, there's been a big change in how to crystallize and how to build in PvP because of the durability patch, which made DR much more effective. And as a result, there's been some pretty interesting things that I've found out. So when you are building for PvP, you first need to decide, do you want to be moderately tanky, super tanky, or just do a lot of damage and be a glass cannon? And in any of those scenarios, let's talk about the crystals. So crystal-wise, this right here is a build that I run when I just want to do massive amounts of damage. This is one of the highest damage builds that has pretty much no regard for anything other than I just want to do big number. And it's 4 Macalods, it's got the Glorious Alucases, you got the RBF Vipers, you got in the Corrupteds, you have a couple of Karames, only 1 Jin Spec Evasion, a Bongwang, and then 2 Red Spear Crystals. I hardly ever run this seriously because it is pretty much just a really fun, I want to do a lot of damage build. I typically pair it with a build like, say, this, oops, like this in PvP, where I'm just running 340 AP and just massive amounts of AP. But more realistically, this is a setup that is much more balanced and much more effective to do good damage as well as be slightly tankier. So we've got Glorious Alucuses, we have got 2 Gen Spec Evasions, we've got 2 Elcars because it gives you the Ignore res, then we've got Red Spirit Crystals, as well as RBF Vipers, and then we have the 4 Hooms because they're just really stat-heavy crystals that give you a lot, and then we've got 1 Bitterness and 1 Hate. This is a really good, solid utility and jack-of-all-trades build that you can use in most cases. You've got the additional tankiness of the Gen Spec Evasions, the additional tankiness of these crystals down here, but then you also got the utility of Ignore Resistance as well as the AP of having these 6 crystals as well. So it's a pretty hybridized, like 6 or 7 defensive crystals and 6 or maybe 8 offensive crystals. And I find that this is a build that I'll be using most of the time. If I ever want to be just like an RBF god, though, then we go into this particular build. It's really not that different than the other build, but it does have a couple changes. So instead of of 2 Elcars, I only have the 1, and I also have in 2 Dark Red Fang armors for the additional 14 DR, and then everything else is mostly the same, but we do have 1 additional Bitterness. So what we're giving up here is we're giving up the Ignore res, and we're giving up the attack speed and AP of the Alucus, and we're gaining an additional 10 DR, another 7 and another 7, so 24 DR gained in order to lose effectively a little bit of human damage accuracy and attack speed, as well as some Ignore res. So this is what I use in RBF if I just want to gear check people. Now another build that is just a lot of fun if you have a DP set and you have DR gear is this one right here. So this is exactly the same as the DR tanky build, except instead of those 3 crystals being those other ones, we now have just Ancient Magic Crystal of Abundance armors, which gives an additional another 15 DR. And then we also have like Jin Kobe's in here as well, the additional DR and the HP. This is like a really, really fun build for just effectively building up to like 800 plus DR. And these are mostly just the main crystal builds that I use. We've got the AP Monkey one for the fun. We've got the more balanced, level-headed, normal PvP build that I use probably 90% of the time. DR Tanky when I just want to be tanky and don't have to worry about CCing others or just want to gear check. And then full DR when I got the full DP setup. So that is what I run for crystals for PvP. And then we have the capped PvP, which this is a little bit interesting, and it's not like it's close enough to never think about for all forms of capped, but you could get a little bit better in some cases. But all in all, you've got the Gen Spec Evasions for the special attack evasion rate. This is not effective in all caps, but, you know, it's, I don't know, you just may as well run it. You've also got the Gearins tier, because this gives an additional all special attack extra damage stat on it. Instead of a Bongwang, it gives you additional 5.5%. Then I just put an Adamantine for a little extra resistance, because there's sometimes nothing really else that you could run. Corrupted's for the extra critical hit damage, and the DR loss and AP gain doesn't matter. A little bit of HP on attack for the absorptions can be really useful. It can save your life in some scenarios. And then we've got Akarods as well as Glorious Alucuses for the extra 4% attack speed that provides. We've got 2 Elcars for the ignore resist, and then we've got 2 decimations for the additional back attack damage. Now this is what I normally just will run in all capped, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, nothing. Doesn't matter, all capped, I will always run something like this. All these other crystal builds are something that I just kind of like mess around with and change depending on who I'm fighting. Like I was fighting a guy named Sapti one time, or a guy named Swid. Obviously I've lost a lot of crystals, I guess, at some point. But yeah, these crystals are not really anything. The main ones I run are going to be all of these up at the top. And that is it for crystals for PvP. Now, for artifacts for PvP. Most of the time, whenever I'm running a large-scale build and I'm fighting, especially when I'm just trying to frag out, I really like running the Wild Human. So I've got melee AP in here for the additional 8 AP, and then 24 additional human damage. This is like my bread and butter, large scale. I wear this most of the time whenever I'm just trying to get a lot of kills in large scale. Sometimes I feel like building tankier and large scale is not useful when you're losing. And whenever I'm in a scenario where we are likely not winning, then this is my go-to because it allows me to gain additional kills that I otherwise wouldn't be able to get if I just had built something tankier. But in cases where you're at an equal level with another guild, or you are at a slight advantage with another guild, then an artifact setup that I like to run for large scale is just 2 DR artifacts with 4 Iron Wall Lightstones. This gives you just a lot of DR, and it's going to give you just a solid amount of tankiness, like gives you 30 extra DR. It's really, really nice and gives you a lot of survivability to get your ults off and stuff. This is also something that I will run like 99% of the time in Red Battlefield, and it's something that I run like 90% of the time in open world PvP because the additional DR is so much stronger than the additional AP. The additional AP and the human damage is pretty bad in comparison. It's only something that you do when you're already losing, pretty much. In any scenario, if you're already losing or you just really need the extra damage for some reason because you can't one combo somebody, then that's when you would run that. But that's all I really run for uncapped PvP. So typically, open world and small scale, I'm running this. And for larger scale and whenever I'm just having fun doing damage, I'm running this. And then for capped Node Wars, because of the HP caps that now exist at 8K, I just run this right here. This gives you an additional all special attack extra damage of 2.5%. It gives you a little bit of stamina, and it gives you a little bit of AP. That's about it. I mean, it's about as effective as you can get. It's slightly better than that of the alternative in running a strike instead of a frenzy, and it gives you a little bit more damage whenever you're back attack, down attacking, or air attacking somebody, but a little less damage when you're hitting them directly in the front compared to putting a strike in that slot. But all in all, I think that this is probably the best in slot for any sort of capped encounters. But that is it, really, when it comes to PvE and PvP. I hope that this was rather insightful. And I know this was a long video. I actually didn't expect it to be this long, but if you made it this far, then I would appreciate if you would drop a sub in the channel. It does help me out a lot. I've decided that I want to try and get up to 100,000 subscribers, so I'm going to be posting a lot more often here, so make sure to subscribe for new content. I do like to do guides, and yeah, appreciate you guys very much for watching. I will see you guys all in the next video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.